a little bit of filler. We have a little bit of filler as people start to come in. We want to make sure that everybody's getting excited, ready to have a great conversation, have great questions. I'm going to get just another minute or two. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to P&P Live. My name is Heidi, and I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator at Politics and Prose. Thank you for joining us and tuning into this virtual format where we continue to bring authors and new books to you. I have the pleasure of hosting our event this evening, and I'm delighted to welcome our guests, Dr. William Stixrud and Ned Johnson. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. You can click the link that we are going to drop into the chat box to get your own copy of What Do You Say? We do have signed books available while supplies last, so jump in there and get your book. If you have a question for our guests, you can click the Q&A button at the bottom of our screen and add one there. At the end of the presentation, our guests will have time to answer some of your questions. You can also upvote the questions you like and want most answered. Now on to the event that you're waiting for. Dr. William Stixrud is a clinical neuropsychologist and faculty member at Children's National Medical Center and George Washington University's Medical School. He lectures widely on the adolescent brain, meditation, and the effects of stress, sleep deprivation, and technology overload on the brain. He is the clinical director at the Stixrud Group. Ned Johnson is the founder of Prep Matters and the co-author of Conquering the SAT, How Parents Can Help Teens Overcome the Pressure and Succeed. A sought-after speaker and teen coach for study skills, parenting dynamics, and anxiety management. His work has been featured on NPR, NewsHour, U.S. News and World Report, The Washington Post, and The Wall Street Journal. It is my pleasure to turn the event over to them. I'll see you all later.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Heidi. And first, I just want to thank Politics and Prose. We love this wonderful bookstore, and we had a wonderful experience speaking at Politics and Prose at the launch of our first books, The Self-Driven Child. We gave dozens of lectures in the DC area, and somebody from Politics and Prose came and sold the books. It's just been a wonderful relationship. We love supporting the store. And I want to talk for a minute about why Ned and I wrote this book. And actually what happened was that our agent, after The Self-Driven Child had been out for about a year, said, think about a second book, and why don't you write a book that makes it easier for us to do what you recommend in A Self-Driven Child? Give us the language to communicate better with our kids. And it made sense to us because so many parents say, God, I've told him a million times, I keep trying to get him to see, or I nag him, I scold him, I lecture him, nothing seems to motivate him. And we thought, well, we have been talking with kids for 65 years between the two of us, one-on-one, and we probably can do this. And also, a lot of the feedback we got about The Self-Driven Child was people liked it, some of the lines in it. There's a line in it just simply, I love you too much to fight with you about your homework. And there's dialogues where it has the way we talk with kids. And parents are saying, give me more of this. So we decided, yeah, let's do this. But I have to admit that I haven't been successful in talking with every kid. Several years ago, I tested this 11-year-old, and I was doing these cognitive measures of having him define words or something. And I transitioned to my interview, and I said, when you think about the kids are you as happy as most kids, less happy, about the same, more happy? And the kid said, can we play the library game? I said, sure, what's that? He said, shh. But for the most part, we were pretty successful. And in The Self-Driven Child, we emphasize the importance of helping kids develop a sense of control over their own lives, because the sense of control is extremely important for emotional well-being, mental health, and it's huge for self-motivation. And in this book, we thought, in talking about communication, we needed to take a step back, because the primary purpose of communication is to build relationship, is to build connection with kids. And so, we asked, in writing the book, we interviewed like dozens of teenagers, and we asked them, who do you feel closest to on this planet? And a lot of them, they said sometimes a parent, but a lot of times it's an uncle or a cousin or a brother or an older kid. And they said, it's somebody who listens to me without judging me, and somebody who doesn't tell me what to do. And this made sense to us because we knew that from extensive research, that two of the keys to building close, supportive relationship with kids are expressing empathy and validating their feelings. Ned, do you want to talk a little bit about this then?
Yeah, I mean, the first chapter in our book is about empathy and validation, in part because it's not logic that calms hard emotions. It's feeling understood, right? If your kid comes home and is bent out of shape, I mean, I failed the test and there was stuff on there that we never seen before, and it's just so unfair. It's easy to jump in with, well, I can't believe the teacher would have put things on they wouldn't know, or well, next time you'll study harder, or one grade doesn't matter. You'll make it up later. But those are kind of invalidating. And from our perspective, we want to seek first to understand, to hear where the kid is coming from, because that's what calms them down. And it's also how we demonstrate to kids that we can handle their hard feelings for things that really matter way beyond grades. We had a wonderful experience. Bill and I were out on the West Coast talking, just Palo Alto. And the day after one of our talks, we got this email from a mom. And she said, she writes, so I came home from the talk last night and my seventh grader came to me and he was just in tears and he declared, I'm the weakest kid in all of seventh grade. And she said, before hearing your talk, I would have said, oh, sweetheart, that can't possibly be true. Or you have so many other skills. It's strength, this and everything. Or I would have tried to solve it and say, well, we'll figure this out. I'll call your gym coach tomorrow and we'll try to solve this. Instead, I just listened with empathy and validation. I said, gosh, sweetheart, you sure look like you're really upset about this. And I can understand why. I mean, I'd be upset if I wanted to be strong and I felt like I wasn't. And she said, I did this in part because I wasn't quite sure what the solution to it was. She said, and here's the neat thing. The next morning, I'm down at breakfast and he walks down to breakfast and in his hand, he's got a plan, a written plan for how to gain strength and ask me if I would help. And as we talk about in the self-driven child, as much as possible, we want kids to feel a sense of control, to feel like the solutions are within them. But we do this with parental help. And the biggest source of parental help is for us to help kids regulate their hard emotions and indicate to them that we can handle those hard emotions. And we do that with empathy and validation.
Yeah. And after the first chapter, we come back to some of the themes of the self-driven child, particularly the idea of parent as consultant, parent as a non-anxious presence, and the idea of intrinsic motivation or self-motivation. And regarding this consultant idea, I mean, we've been teaching for years this idea that as kids get older, it makes sense for parents to for us to think of ourselves more as consultants to our kids, whose job it is to help kids figure out who they want to be, what kind of life they want, and how to create it, than it is to be their manager or their boss or the homework police. And there are three implications of this idea of thinking about yourself more as a consultant. One is that we want to offer help, we want to offer advice. We have a lot to teach our kids. We want to offer it rather than force it down their throats. And we don't want kids using all their energy fighting what's in their best interest. And we want to encourage kids to make their own decisions. And we've always felt that the best message you can give an adolescent, besides I love you, is that I have confidence in your ability to make decisions about your own life and to learn from your mistakes. And I want you to have a ton of experience doing that before you leave home. And the third thing is that we want kids to solve their own problems as much as possible with our support. Because it's when a kid solves a problem on his own, changes the brain in a way that when something stressful happens, the kid leaps into coping mode as opposed to freaking out. And it's those three implications, because the goal is we want kids to be able to run their own life before we send them off to college. We see so many kids who go off to college and they're home by November. They just aren't ready. They don't have that experience of taking responsibility for themselves and running their own life. So we talk about the language of getting buy-in. So rather than just blathering or just lecturing at kids, we say, I've got an idea about that. You want to hear it? Or I'm wondering what would happen if you did it this way. So we're suggesting, we aren't forcing. And we actually talk about the language of no force. And what if we take force, if we stop trying to force, and we let kids know, I'm not going to try to force you. It's a little scary. It feels a little scary at first, but it dramatically increases their willingness to go along with this. I did a consultation on a kid whose mom wanted me to talk him into trying Ritalin for his ADHD, which he'd resisted for 6 years. And I said, I don't believe in talking kids into stuff, but I'll talk to him about it. And all I did, I just said, I don't want anybody to try to force you to take this medication. And I told him what to do if anybody tried to force him. Put it in your cheek and pretend to swallow, that kind of thing. And I said, but you're smart enough to make an informed decision about this. So it seems to me it makes sense to try it and see what it does, because then you can decide to use it or not. And the kid immediately wanted to try the medicine. And it was 2 months later, his mom called and said he's gotten his C's up to A's. And the medicine doesn't always work that fast, but for that well. But in this case, all it took was taking force off the table and this kid was willing to go along with it.
And one of the reasons that we nag and we force is we feel more in control, because as Bill mentioned before, a low sense of control is just so darn stressful. And it can be hard to button your lip. It can be hard to sit on your hands and wait. And this is why in the self-driven child, we talk about the idea of a non-anxious presence, a term we borrowed from a great educator and religious leader, Edwin Freeman. And it's simply the idea that things work better, systems work better, and brains work better when we can be a non-anxious presence, because our calm can help other people be calm around us. And I'm sorry to say that the non-anxious presence seems to be a little bit in short supply, not just here in DC, but kind of across the country. I mean, we're in Seattle, and there's second graders who are in full-on school refusal. In Dallas, the fifth grade boys are undone by the pressure to get the best grades in fifth grade. And we thought, my goodness, these kids must be getting, rather than messages of a non-anxious presence by the adults around them, it seems to me they must be getting messages of be very afraid. And I don't mean to pick on any family or any school or any community, because goodness knows this is across the whole darn country. But it also seems to us that this is an opportunity, because all emotions are contagious, okay? Anxiety and stress and fear are contagious, but so is calm. We love the fact that the calm is contagious is actually a mantra of the Navy SEALs. So how do we convey the idea of being a non-anxious presence? Well, some of it is through our, I would say, how do we convey being anxious? Well, through our language, through constantly checking for hypervigilance, tracking their devices. How do we convey a non-anxious presence? By conveying trust. And as I mentioned before, hanging with kids when their feelings are hard and not going to pieces. If a kid comes back with something that's like incendiary and you're like, oh my word, you can do something. The wonderful researcher named Ron McGann describes as wigging. And you just repeat back. So what I understand from that is that you completely bombed that test and you weren't prepared. And now you're really worried about what this means for the rest of your semester. It buys you time, but it also expresses that empathy and validation. And also, there's a lot to know about specific language. It turns out, sadly, that negative language of no and fear and create a bigger reaction in the brain than do positive words of can and love and yes. When you put people in functional MRI and you say the word no, it just, your brain lights up like a Christmas tree in the stress response part of the brain. So we look a lot at the research of John and Julie Gottman, who are these experts on relationships. And they have settled on the idea, the research, that in order to have kind of this positive, non-anxious presence in relationships, we need to move in the direction of a ratio 5-to-1 positive words, 5 positive for 1, every 1 negative, really because those negative words are so injurious to our relationship. The second thing we talk about being, and there's a lot about non-anxious presence, but the second point I want to make is that as much as we can, because we want to be effective in talking with our kids, that if we can adopt or recommit to practices of lowering stress, we need to have more ways to sort of throw off stress than what brings stress into our systems, our bodies and our brains. And goodness knows this last year has seen an uptick in intakes of stress. And it seems to me we want to recommit to being well rested, to practices of meditation, to spending time with people who nurture us and activities that are valuable, even if they aren't about accomplishment, because they lower stress for us. Because when we do that, and we can move in the direction of being a non-anxious presence, we're so much more effective in helping our kids, especially as we help them through feelings that are hard.
Ned, I know this mom and has a 17-year-old kid with autism, and they both learned TM. And the mom's pretty well connected and actually had a reporter come and interview them. And the reporter asked the kid, so what have you noticed from practicing TM? And he says, TM calms the mind and it calms the mom. And I think he noticed there's increasingly non-anxious presence. And the third theme that we pick up is this theme of self-motivation. And in both books, we point to this, that we think is the greatest theory of motivation, which is self-determination theory, which holds that to be intrinsically motivated, you have to have three needs met: for a sense of autonomy, a sense of relatedness, and a sense of competence. And in this area and all over the country, what we can tell, that what happens is we lean so hard on competence or achievement that it undermines that healthy desire to develop yourself. We see kids who are obsessively driven, kids who give up because what's the point of trying? And so we were struck by reading this report from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation in 2017 that said the 4 primary causes of stress and anxiety in adolescence are poverty, trauma, discrimination, and excessive pressure to excel. And it's just that motivating kids through fear, through guilt, through anger, bribing them, just doesn't work. It usually doesn't work in the short run. It certainly doesn't work in the long run. And I had this, in terms of motivating by fear, I was at a school meeting on a kid who was 8th grade kid doing terrible in school. And the principal said at the meeting, I've had 2 conversations with this kid trying to get him to see how important it is that he do better. And I tested this kid, and he had learning disabilities and ADHD and a language disorder. School is hard for him. And he said, I was trying to get him to see this is a really important year because he's applying out to independent high schools. And I said respectfully that I think that the more we try to use fear to motivate him, he's already discouraged. He's already hugely anxious. He's probably already tried to do better and hasn't been able to. Why don't we just tell him it's not that big a deal? Where you go to high school is not the end of the world. And if you don't get in as a 9th grader where you want to go, then you'll work hard and transfer someplace else. I want you to get this together, but it doesn't have to be tomorrow. We want to give kids a way to see how I can get from where they are to where they want to be, and without just unnecessary fear. Then it turned out, I called the mom a year later, and she said actually he got into a school that had good learning support, and he's been very responsible. He's really the kind of manifesting these signs of being self-driven. So we talk in this about the kind of how do we talk with kids in ways to fuel that healthy self-motivation.
And though I talk about kids, being with kids when they're in hard feelings, hard places, and Bill as well, we obviously want as parents to help our kids to move out of those hard places, which is really the language of change. And we have a chapter in our book about the language and silence of change. And there are 2 wonderful psychologists who really pioneered the work of what's called motivational interviewing. And their first work actually was with really hardcore problem drinkers. And what traditionally folks had done, I think we can come up with one more reason to convince these people that if you're going to lose your health, you're going to lose your spouse, you can lose your job, you can lose everything, as though that would motivate change. But what happened is it didn't change them. They just dug in deeper. They felt more estranged. They were more resistant. There was more conflict, which isn't really the way that we help people move in the direction they want to move or that we'd like them to move. And there are really 2 great insights of motivational interviewing. One is that people we have as parents, as people who love other people, we have a righting reflex. If your kid brings you a problem, if your spouse, your family, your neighbor, you have a natural tendency to want to say, well, what about this? What about this? And the problem is that doesn't help as much as we would like, because the other insight is that people are ambivalent about change. And so we start arguing one side of the equation, they argue the other. Right? I mean, a kid who's really having a dickens of a hard time, is really underperforming in school, it's not lost on them that if they had A's and B's rather than C's and D's, that they'd feel better about themselves. They get more approval in school, that they had the more choices for college. But it's also not lost on them that, I've tried hard before and it didn't work out, or I'd have to sacrifice a lot. I'd have to stop playing Xbox, right? If I wanted to get better grades, right? Or I could try really hard and I could come up short, and that'd be even harder. And so the language of motivational change is not trying to change people, but using these tools we've talked about of open-ended questions, of reflective listening. And then here's the key thing, listening for change talk. And this requires real delicacy. And so there's actual whole training for this. But we, all of us, can take some of the lessons from this. So there's a story in the book, great friend of ours who's a school therapist, and she's talking with this girl who's smoking pot like it's her job. And that's kind of a problem. And so that our friend talks to this girl and says, look, I'm not going to be the umpteenth adult to try to talk you out of smoking pot, because you're smart, and I'm sure you've heard the reasons why it's problematic. But I'm curious to know more about your relationship with smoking pot. Can you tell me about that? And the girl says, well, I feel a lot more relaxed when I'm high. And I kind of like the kids I hang out with. They're kind of cool. And I feel cooler when I'm high, and I feel cooler when I'm with them. And her friend says, okay, well, that makes sense to me. And she keeps talking along these lines. And eventually the girl says, but it is kind of expensive. Now, this is the place where I'd be inclined to jump. Yeah, see, if you stop. But she doesn't do that, because we listen for change talk. And the idea behind this is that articulating your own reasons for change, it's so much more powerful than having someone else tell you the reason why you need to change. And so this girl was in an ambivalent place. She could see reasons to smoke less, but she also knew she'd already articulated the reasons why to smoke. So she didn't want to sniff out this, So she said, well, if you had more money, I don't know, what would you do with it? Oh, my friend has this really cool pair of shoes. I love a pair like hers, except green, because I'm not a red person. And I think if I had more money, I'd probably get my hair done. Oh, that's cool. That makes sense to me too. And she says nothing more. And she sees this girl about 3 weeks later, and she's got her hair done. And she just looks at her and said, hey, your hair's really cute. Tell me about that. And she said, well, I decided this week I just smoke. I'd only buy once a week, and I'd smoke a little less. Do you like it? I feel like it's pretty cool. And it's hard to do this all the time because we want to change now. But the way to go about this, being a non-anxious presence, taking the long view, using these tools of reflective listening, and creating the opportunity for kids to articulate for themselves, because even kids who are struggling and seem like they're willfully screwing up in every way, they too are ambivalent, and given the opportunity would like to change and move in a direction that's more healthy for them.
And one of the cool things about this story too is this girl that I was talking about. When she stopped smoking a little less, she realized how much pot was affecting her academically. And so she cut down even more because she didn't want to do badly in school. But it didn't come by preaching or just landing on her. It tried by seeking first to understand. And we love this idea that we have more power to influence our kids by changing ourselves than by trying to change our kids, because both from the motivational interviewing perspective, and also the other thing we talk about is this new SPACE program, which stands for Supportive Parenting of Anxious Childhood Emotions, out of Yale, that basically lowers childhood anxiety and adolescent anxiety and OCD by simply the parents changing their steps. And then the parents are encouraged to pay attention to the way they've adapted to the kids' anxiety by making what they call accommodations. That if you're really anxious, I reassure you continually. That's accommodation. And accommodations make kids less anxious in the moment, but over time they make them more anxious. And so what parents are taught to do are to make supportive statements like this. I know that if you're really worried about making mistakes in your homework, and I know that it makes you feel less anxious if I check it 3 or 4 times for you. But I also know that that's not making you less anxious. And I want you to know that I have confidence. I'm 100% sure that you can handle the anxiety about making mistakes. And so we use language like this to say, express confidence in the kid. And then later we say, I'm going to make this change. I'm not going to do this anymore. And then we have to deal with the blowback, and we talk about that, how the SPACE program does that. But the basic idea, the reason we call this chapter the language and silence of change, is that listening piece, and try to, using empathy, let kids know I understand, and I'm not going to try to change you. I'm not going to try to force you. I'm going to change my own behavior. Is very, very powerful.
And the thing that probably most parents would most like to change is their kids' use of technology. So, anticipating some future questions, we actually have a chapter in the book called The Hard Ones, Technology and Sleep. And if you've got an infant, goodness knows you'd give $100 if you could get your kid to sleep, but you can't make them. And it's also true that we can't make our kids use technology in a certain way. We have a tendency to think that we're going to pull a power play. Now, maybe when they're little guys under the age of 5, no one needs a smart anything. Thank you very much. But as teenagers, we really want to apply this consultant approach. Because from our perspective, the most important thing is not to manage kids' use or teenagers' use of technology, but to work with them in ways that are respectful and therefore more effective to help them learn to manage their own use of technology. So I'll tell a quick story that's in the book about my lovely, lovely son, Matthew, who's now going into his second year of college. And he is delightful and he's a little ADHD and he loves video games like a lot of folks, right? And so when he was a sophomore, the game Fortnite came through our family like a plague. And we were watching, he was really enjoying it because he was connecting with kids who otherwise wouldn't have connected with, enjoying the heck out of it, but we were concerned. So on a Thursday night, he had a Friday off of school. And I asked him on Thursday, so Matthew, so what are you going to do with your day off tomorrow? And he says, he smiles and says, play Fortnite. And I'm like, okay, great, awesome. Anything else? I'll think about it. Okay. I go to work, I come home 6 o'clock on a Friday. There's my lovely child still in front of the computer, blowing things up or whatever he's doing, right? Still in his pajamas. I admit to being a little hot. And I look at him and say, can you please finish, win, lose? I don't really care. Fortunately, the game does not take forever. Oh, and could you get dressed? I would like to go out for pizza. And so, oh, yeah. And he's a really easygoing kid. So there's that. He says, I'll finish up, and he gets dressed. When we go out for pizza, I simmered down. I say nothing more that night. Saturday, I say nothing more. Sunday, I say nothing until 5 o'clock, which if you have an adolescent boy, you know is the witching hour when it occurs to him, oh my gosh, tomorrow is in fact Monday and I have all this work to do. And he's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I wasted my whole day Friday and I didn't do any of my work. If ever there were an opportunity for a parental, I told you so, that was it. But you're in the middle of writing this book, so I thought I should play this differently. So I repeated back, so what you're telling me is you got a ton of work and you're just now starting it? Yikes, that feels kind of hard. Can I ask a question? Sure, trying to get by him. Do you know how many hours you spent playing on Friday? 8, 10 maybe? Wow, was it fun? God, it was great. I won 4 times, it was so cool. Nice. But if you had to, how many hours would have been enough to kind of get your Fortnite fix in? 4 or 5. Okay, one more question. In the future, would it help if mom or I helped you kind of manage your use of technology so you could play, but you don't feel like you wasted the whole day? Yeah, that'd be great. And it's hard to watch kids waste so much time. I get that. But from my perspective, and in my perspective then, my kid was a couple years away from going off to college with a suitcase of clothes and another suitcase full of my money. And goodness, if he hadn't had the experience of struggling with technology, and we as adults struggle with technology, if he had the experience of struggling, he couldn't learn to manage it for himself. And so even with the hard ones, we take this consultative approach. It's more helpful, it's more effective, and it's also a lot more respectful.
Hallelujah. No question. Let's do a speed round.
Sure.
Speed round, the last couple of things. So we were in Texas a couple of years ago and talking to student leaders in this independent school. And we asked them, how many of you want to be happy as adults? And they all kind of sheepishly raised their head, Doug. And we said, what do you understand it takes to be happy as an adult? And this one kid raised his hand and he said, well, we understand that if you get into a good enough college, everything is set. And Dad and I wondered, how did they get such a wrong idea? And so we were paying attention to Laurie Santos' work, the psychologist at Yale who lived in residential college there and was just aware of how unhappy so many of the undergraduate students were. So she started teaching a course on the pursuit of happiness. This has been the most popular course in the history of Yale University. And then and I were thinking as we were writing this book, why should kids have to wait till they get to college and are miserable to learn about happiness? So we actually have a chapter on talking with kids about the pursuit of happiness, which we talk through some of the science, and we talk with kids, again, that Martin Seligman, who started the whole field of positive psychology, where they study happiness, that he has a formula where there's 5 factors that contribute to happiness. And achievement is one of them, but it's only 20%. And it's other things like meaning, and it's like relationships, and it's like the passionate pursuit of stuff you love. And we have a chapter about talking with kids about that and about our own experience and what makes life meaningful, how important our relationships are. And we recommend saying to kids stuff like, in my point of view, your relationship with your friends are as important as your work. Or your baseball playing is as important to me as your schoolwork is. That's a really important part of your development. It's great for your brain and it makes people happy. So I think we think that kids just grow up with this crazy idea that if they just single-mindedly pursue achievement, they're going to be happy. And we just meet so many high achieving kids who are unhappy that we think that can't really be right.
When we talk about this, a lot of people think that, you're saying, kind of let kids do whatever. And 60 years of research have shown that the most effective model of parenting is authoritative. And we have natural authority, but it's not laissez-faire and it's not authoritarian. But we spend the last chapter of our book talking about what about consequences? Because we want kids to learn from their experience. We love natural consequences, things that just happen, as the world responds to our actions. And in terms of logical consequences, we talk about the great work of Jane Nelson, and we can have those, but that's done in a way that's collaborative, really collaborative problem solving. If we keep in mind that the etymological root of the word discipline is to teach. And it's our job as parents to teach kids, to help kids learn about the world and how to be effective in the world. But, childhood has always been challenging, particularly right now. And goodness knows parenting has always been challenging, particularly right now, because the inflows of stress and the pressures on us are more than, they're more than we would like. But we want to end with where we started, that if there's a silver bullet against the effects of stress on young people, and importantly, on the developing brains of young people, it's how close the connection is that the child has with a parent or two parents or other caregivers in their lives. And so we wrote this book so that we can be effective in how we communicate values and our love to one another. Because when we're more effective, it's so much easier to be less stressed. And we also know that when we're stressed, it's awfully hard to convey the warmth that we feel for our kids and that we want them to feel for us. So we're really happy about this book. We hope you are too, because ultimately we want you to be effective in how you talk to your kids, because you have so much to share and we want them to have the benefit of your wisdom and your warmth.
So we're happy to take any questions.
So Heidi, I'm guessing you might have a few questions for us, which we'd love to hear.
Fantastic. Well, before we get started, I just want to say I took a page of notes. I found it enormously helpful. So thank you, Bill and Ned. Thank you so much. But we do have a lot of people on here, and this is an amazing opportunity to ask the both of you some questions. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with a question from Daisy. And she has a question, kind of going back to something you mentioned early on. How do you get kids interested in meditation?
So it's a really good question. And the truth is that most kids aren't. and most kids, the idea, it's not the first thing they think of. And my experience is when kids are really hurting, kids have the terrible headache pain, kids are in a lot of emotional pain, they oftentimes are willing to do it. And I see kids who are managing stress in very unhealthy ways, chemically. A lot of kids, I get them to try it. And I think, though, that it's not easy. And I think that we don't want to force. And where I'm putting my attention is that kids will do it if other kids do it. And I collaborated on 2 studies of middle school kids with ADHD practicing transcendental meditation in school twice a day. And we got beautiful results. The kids loved it, but they did it together. So my feeling is we want to work together to at least make it possible for kids, not require them, but at least make it possible for them to have a meditation period in school, or 2, ideally. Yeah. They just do so much better. They feel better. That the research is so compelling. And even if you take half an hour out of your school day, how much more effective you are, how much more you achieve. But I think that we have to remember that especially after puberty, peers are like crack cocaine to kids, and we have to figure out how do we get them to do it in groups.
Ned, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, just like we talk about, as a consultant, we offer help. As Bill points out, so often, if a kid is struggling, gosh, that sounds like it's really hard, And I know someone who knows who knows a technique that actually helps people feel a little better. And if you're interested, I'd be happy to tell you about it. Or I'd be happy to introduce you, let them explain to you how this works, and then you can decide for yourself whether that's something that might be useful. But also, I know so many parents who are trying to get their kids to meditate. And if instead you could meditate, as parents, if we can meditate ourselves, it would be enormously useful. I was just talking with Richie Davidson, who heads the Center for Healthy Minds out in University of Wisconsin. He's the guy who worked on meditation and MRIs with the Dalai Lama. And study after study, when you teach meditation to teachers, the kids do better because the kids are less stressed. In my house, and I won't go into details, I have a child who's had a very significant health challenge this summer, pretty scary. And person after person has said to my wife and to me, I don't know how you're so calm about this. And my wife said, I think if I hadn't learned to practice transcendental meditation 2 years ago, I wouldn't handle it the way that I am right now. And, again, I want her and I want me and I want all parents to be as effective as we can be, particularly when things are hard. And it's because we need processes so that we can throw up at least as much stress as the world throws at us.
Yeah. A great reminder to put our oxygen masks on first, right?
Totally.
We talked to a lot of kids who say, my dad really yelled at me last night. What for? For yelling at my brother. Because we're emotionally reactive, but it is true. There's a story in a book about a dad who learned to meditate, and was just struck by how the things that used to just send him up, send him to the moon, just annoyed him like crazy, that his kid just didn't seem to bother him very much. Just became less reactive. Yeah. So it's a good practice.
Great, thank you. We've got some great questions here. Beth Brumwell's asking, what if your kid isn't motivated to be high achieving, views it as calling attention to himself, and therefore is okay being unseen / in the middle of the pack? What advice do you have for Beth?
I work with a lot of underachievers, and I always have. And one of the things I tell them is that my first attempt at graduate school, I went 20 straight weeks, which is 2 quarters, without turning in a single assignment. And I say 20 weeks, nothing, top that. And but I also tell them that especially once they're in high school, I say that you can flunk every single one of your classes. And if you decide that was a bad idea, I want to get an education, you can go to Montgomery College or go to your local community college and get 30 credits, 2 semesters. And then you can apply to most of the colleges in this country, and they don't want to see your high school transcript. So I don't want to make it worse by thinking that somehow that you're screwing up your whole life, because there's other ways to turn this around. And when I give them a way to think about getting from where they are to where they might want to be, that it actually motivates them. They actually work harder. And I think that so many kids are told you're going to end up working McDonald's kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And it's just not true. I've just seen thousands of kids who once school became important to them, and once they had some confidence they could do something. Then once they understood that getting straight A's isn't the key to being a successful life, that they'd actually work hard to develop themselves.
Yeah.
And we try to remind ourselves that all kids have brains in their head, whether they're using them at the moment or not, and that they want their lives to work out. And when kids are struggling, our fears aren't so much about the present, but about the future, right? The kid who's a C student now is going to have a C life. In our experience, it doesn't work out. The kids may be stuck for a while, but they don't tend to stay stuck because, again, they want their lives to work out. And when I always think about, the kid who's the tallest kid in 7th grade, enjoy it now, because you're not going to be there, in 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, right? And so a kid who's at the back of the pack in whatever it is, in 5th, 6th, 7th grade. I mean, there's a story that I often tell. I mean, I was from a family where there were my family upbringing could have been easier than it was. I had a father who's an alcoholic who eventually drank himself to death. My mother struggled as a result of that with her mental health, was in and out of institutions. I spent 3 months of seventh grade in a pediatric psychiatric hospital. Not as cool as it sounds. And I went from getting the top grade on everything I did in every class to not handing in anything. But I bounced back because I wanted my life to be successful. And my life is successful in every possible way that matters to me. And I think a part of it was that the adults around me, my parents to their best ability, and the teachers, they didn't give any sense that this is a disaster. They weren't feeling sorry for me. They say, this sounds like a tough thing you're going through. And so if you're a parent who has a kid who's having a rough time, we don't feel sorry. We say, this is okay for now. It's okay for now. And then we help them get to a better place that they want to get to.
Yeah, that's great.
We actually have a chapter in the book called "What If I Don't Want to Live Up to My Expectations?" And I think we talk about with kids who are underachieving, and it's in somewhere as a badge of honor, that we want to give them the message that I love you infinitely, no matter how you do in school. Yes. That my relationship with you is more important than whether you do your schoolwork, whether you get A's or B's. And that motivates kids. But because most of the kids who are underachieving have tried to do well and not been able to. And they figure, what's the point? Yeah. And what we recommend is say, what I care about, and I'll say, I don't give a damn about your grades. What I care about is you develop yourself so you have something useful to offer this world. And I've tested you. I know that you're good at this, and I can see a way that you're going to be able to contribute to this world. And a lot of the kids who aren't doing very well in school, they're just more social. They say, what are you happiest? Hanging out with my friends. When I say that, you're probably going to make a living hanging out with people. But I want you to know that the jobs that involve that skilled interacting with people, they all require a bachelor's degree, almost all, for sales. And most of them require advanced degrees. So at some point, I want you to figure out how to do school better. So it's got to take that approach. But if you have you have to take that pressure off, that idea that you got to turn this around. Yeah. It just doesn't work.
Such a good perspective. Oh, we have a lot more questions now. So let's keep going here. CWH asks, in your experience, how do these techniques work with children with developmental disabilities or severe emotional problems? Are there any modifications that you can use?
I don't know. Why don't you handle that?
Yeah, so I was struck when we were writing our first book, The Self-Driven Child, that I found 2 studies on the promotion of autonomy, that sense of control, in kids with learning disabilities. I couldn't find any about autism. I couldn't find any about ADHD. And I think that here, from our perspective, in order to be fully independent, to live an independent life, you have to have the sense that this is my life, and I'm going to get out of it what I put into it. And so we have to promote that sense of autonomy. And more recently, there's studies coming out about the promotion of autonomy in kids with various kinds of developmental challenges. Even in dementia, people with dementia, they do better if you say, do you want your caregiver to come at 2 or 2:30? Just give them choice. People live longer in nursing homes if they have choice. And so that low sense of control is so stressful that it's good for everybody. Yeah. But certainly kids who have severe emotional problems, this is, we say that a lot of those kids need intervention. And even if they're very depressed or they're suicidal or they're so anxious they can't think straight, we may have to make decisions for them rather than letting go of their own decisions. We may have to put them into treatment they don't want to be, or we may have to put them into a program someplace they don't want to be in. And there are times where we have to override their will, their sense of autonomy. But generally, most of the good communication, helpful for everybody. Supporting a sense of control, helpful for everybody. Try to support that autonomous motivation, good for everybody. Teaching kids to regulate sleep, their technology, good for everybody.
Yeah, great. Ned, I'm going to have you answer this next one first. Well, first of all, from Charlene, she says, hi, Bill and Ned. How do you suggest parents serve as a non-anxious presence when they're worried about back to school with the COVID Delta variant?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, for me, one of the things is taking the long view. It's really, we've heard a lot of articles about the lost year, as though, ninth grade is the only year to learn algebra, right? Or that these things are irreplaceable. And holding to that belief probably doesn't help that much. There are silver linings to this. You just have to look a little bit harder for them. I mean, again, I talk about my own experience, but I think all of us, if we're honest, we reflect on their times in our life that were really hard. I mean, I wrote a piece for the Washington Post a couple months into the pandemic, wondering whether this might actually be a source of future resilience. And there were so many articles, so many books written pre-pandemic about these kids aren't hardy enough, right? They got no gumption, they got no resilience, blah blah blah. And the pretty nice recipe that adversity plus support equals resilience. And I think right now we got adequate adversity. What we want to do is provide support. And so if we as parents can say, sweetheart, I know this is hard, and I'm so sorry that you're not going to have a soccer game. And yeah, Zoom is hard. Golly, it's tough. But if it's easier for kids to believe that this is going to come out okay, if we can believe that it's going to come out okay, and if you're having a really hard time doing that, then like we were saying before, you make sure that you're getting enough sleep. Make sure you're spending time with people who nurture you. Make sure take up meditation if you're or revisit it if you haven't done it in a while. And we just if you're feeling stressed all the time, then it simply must be that the stress that's coming into is not balanced by the stress that's going out of you. And I say this understanding that there are people who have headwinds that are, I mean, really traumatic of financial loss and loss of family members. And that may be at a different place. But for the garden variety folks thinking, oh my gosh, another year of Zoom learning, try to, there's a William James who founded psychology at Harvard says our experience consists that of which we choose to attend to. And so for all we're looking for is the losses, we'll see them. My wife teaches Latin at a local independent school, and she had a student in 7th grade who said, this is the first time in my life that I've consistently had dinner with both of my parents.
Yeah.
That's something.
Yeah, absolutely.
And can I just add that I think that often our inclination is to reassure our kids it's going to be okay. And what it turns out is it's actually more effective to say, to express confidence that they can handle whatever comes. And so much of helping kids with anxiety is helping them live with uncertainty and make peace with the fact that you never know what's going to happen. And I think that we can use these opportunities to focus on, here's the things we control, here's the things we can't, and we can either fret about it or we can make peace with the fact that I don't always know what's going to happen. But and we can help kids think of all the things that you've handled. If you want to be confident going this year, think about all the things that you've handled in your life. And I know you can do this.
Great advice. Thank you. The next question is from Claire Nold Glasser. She asks, how can we help kids and parents move away from the notion that the harder a college is to get into, the better it is? Why are folks so fixated on prestige? Is it a badge of honor for good parenting? She asks. I don't know who wants to take that.
Oh, I mean, we love the work of Alan Kruger and Stacy Bergdale that basically looks through all the literature of people of folks who got into the most selective colleges and attended them, or got into selective colleges and went someplace else. And in terms of lifetime earnings, happiness, career success, it didn't make any difference because it was the person, not the school. But particularly for kids who are like, I have to go to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, whatever, it's hard to talk kids out of that. And from our perspective, a lot of this, it's just based in fear, that if I don't go to the most selective colleges, that I won't have the most selective life. And talking kids out of that it doesn't tend to work because we're back to that ambivalence piece. So we talk about it, that we have one of our chapters talks about perfectionism. And it's the same kind of thinking where you say, gosh, it must be pretty scary to feel like you have to be perfect all the time, or it must be a little intense to feel like if you don't go to one of 5 colleges, you're not going to have a successful life. Yeah, I'd be stressed out about that too. And again, it's like this Jedi mind trick where you're not trying to talk kids out of Harvard, Yale, Princeton. And they'll say, "Oh my gosh." And so, well, is that really what you think? I'd love to hear more about that, because most people don't want to hold on to thoughts that make them miserable, right? It's just when we try to take them away from them, they feel like this is what they have to believe. But we love we love the work of Challenge Success out on the West Coast. Denise Pope, our friend Charlene Margot, who's on this call, and the Parent Education Group. I mean, part of this is just constantly getting messages from people who do know what they're talking about, to sort of balance out a little bit the messages of from my perspective, every dope at a cocktail party says, well, if you don't get in the top 10, because fear is contagious. Mm-hmm. And so if we can spend time with people who can confidently, calmly remind us that there are many, many, many paths to success. And our feeling look, I'm a guy who helps people get into college, I get it. Mm-hmm. But most mental health is changing thinking from I have to I want to. And so if you want to work super hard and go to Princeton and 4 years of Orange is great for you, rock on. But the idea that you have to, it's not borne out by statistics, it's not borne out by literature, it's not borne out by lived experience. And we can gently broaden people's perspective on how to think about this, so they can help their kids broaden their thinking on how to think about this.
And I'll mention that I graduated from high school in Seattle, Washington, with a 2.8 grade point average, and I only needed a 2.5 to get into the University of Washington, and I still kick myself for having overachieved and spent that extra time studying to get a 2.8. But I loved being at the University of Washington. It was great. I was able to play in a band with people I grew up with, and
you still play in a band with the people you grew up with.
I still do, but my father died at the very end of my senior year in high school, and it kind of woke me up. And I went from basically a 2.0 grade point average the first quarter of my senior year in high school to a 4.0 first semester in college, and I had the ability to be a good student, but I just didn't care very much about it. And so my experience, certainly, when I moved out to DC from Seattle and the West Coast, the East Coast, and I saw this, what I thought to be insane preoccupation with elite colleges. I thought, because I didn't grow up with people like that. And there's a lot of pockets in the country where they're still happy to go to their local college or the local university. But I do think, I agree with everything Ned said. Just that I want to say, I don't feel inferior to anybody who have a completely charmed life, and I don't regret that having gone to a really elite college, for whatever it's worth.
Yeah. We had time for about one more question, so I'm going to try to combine these last two for both of you. This is from Suzanne Dowd and Caleb Beckert. Suzanne asks, do you have any suggestions for teens who aren't receptive to empathetic listening and want to handle things on their own? And then Kayla's question is are these questions also, the way that you're dealing with these, the advice that you give, is also good for older kids, like older teens or kids that are in college?
Well, the short answer is yeah. I mean, this is good for everyone. For a kid who doesn't seem to respond to the empathetic listening, our feeling in many ways is sort of step back a little bit, and be a little bit lighter. I have I have a daughter who's a senior in high school who is brilliant. She has at least 20 IQ, maybe 40 IQ points to me. But she's intense, right? And when she's in a bad mood, that's where she is. And so there's a story in the book where she was in a really rough mood, and my wife was trying to calm, to try to cheer her up with every tool and every arrow in her quiver, and it wasn't taking in it, and it seemed to be going the other direction. And I just gently went over to my wife and I said, look, I can see what you're trying to do, and I love it. But for whatever reason, it looks like she needs to be where she is right now. And part of it is that hard feelings, I mean, those are an important part of life. I mean, if you weren't upset about anything in the last year, you're not paying attention, right? And so one of the things, with my daughter, she's more intense than my son, I'll be much lighter and say, wow, you look like you're having a hard day. And I don't expect anything more than that. I don't expect her to pour her soul, her heart and soul out to me. It's just saying, I see you. I'm paying attention. And if you, and it's a way to signal, if you want to talk about this, I'm available. It doesn't go unnoticed that the world's not being too nice to you today.
I like that. Yeah. Bill?
Oh, I think that for kids who don't respond to that, if they're upset, that they don't want, I mean, there are kids, until you get kind of practice at that reflective listening, kids say, why are you just repeating everything I say? So it takes some practice to let them, I'm just trying to understand what you're feeling. Kids don't like that. I think one of the things that we find is that sharing our own feelings is a good way to kind of prime the pump for kids. And so if we can't, we don't want to try to pry stuff out of kids. If they don't want to be listened to in a careful way, then we can express confidence in their ability to handle stuff. And we can say to them stuff like, I love the fact that you are so confident you can handle things on your own and don't need my help. If you ever do, let me know.
So helpful. I just can see myself using these things with my two kids, my 10 and my 13-year-old. This has been so invaluable. Thank you so much for all of this wonderful advice.
Can I add one thing, Heidi?
Yes, please.
So sometimes parents say, what is it too late? My kid's 16 years old. Is it too late? And I was just talking with the parents of a 15-year-old the other day, who's having a lot of emotional troubles and very kind of anxious, OCD, depression. And the parents have been working with therapists to try to change the way that they respond to the kid. And they've been working particularly on this validation. And the kid brought some of the problem to the parents. And rather than telling her what to do or kind of talking out of it, they validated her feeling. And the kid emailed them the next morning and said, I can tell you're really trying to change. This helps me so much.
Power of listening. Amazing. Well, just as a reminder, everyone, you can buy What Do You Say from the chat box below. Please, everyone, have a chance to read it thoroughly, listen to this webinar again, jot down your notes. I know it's going to be very helpful to parents everywhere. So thanks, Bill, and thanks, Ned. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Heidi. And buy it from Politics and Prose.
Yes, please do.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Thanks, Heidi.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.